This IM cost only around $47 and using 3 types of driver in a very unusual combination. So hello and welcome to Aftersound review, and this is my review for Geekworld GK10 that is using 2 dynamic driver, 1 balancer mature and 2 piezoelectric driver. Well, that's a very unusual driver combination, but let's see how they sound. And just like usual, I will break down this review from the build, fit, frequency response, sound, and comparison. Before I explain about the build quality, I need to say that this IM is already using a third-party cable because this belongs to a friend of mine, Mr. Burhan. Thank you for the loan. And the build quality of this IM is just okay. It's all using resin build, with the very peculiar thing here is the faceplate that is somehow has this heart-shaped kind of faceplate, but other than that, nothing about this IM is unique. It's also using 2-pin connector. In terms of ergonomic, even though they have this peculiar heart shape for its faceplate, but for the fit it's actually just fine, and I could simply wear them for hours without any complaint. When it comes to its tonality, well, I could simply say that it has a V-shaped signature with very big mid-bass bloom, and you could actually see in the measurement here, lacking sub-bass extension, and also the treble is quite forward. And I want to say that you could definitely tell that there's 3 types of driver when you're hearing to it. The bass is bloomy and it's big. The mid-range is actually okay, but the treble has some extra sparkle and weird timbre on it. Starting from the low frequency, I do think that this IM has simply too much mid-bass and lacking sub-bass, making any kind of song sounds blooming, thick, but lacks rumble. So simply said, I don't like it. It has such a really thick and powerful kind of bass, but it's lacking texture, it's lacking rumble, and yeah, it doesn't simply deep enough, and it's slow. And it's also bleeding to the mid-range, so simply said, it's a low quality bass, I should say. In terms of mid-range, it's actually okay. It has moderate elevation for its ear gain area, and actually hearing male or female vocal sounds okay also. But the problem is the positioning of the vocal is simply buried by the blooming mid-bass, so you couldn't really hear that balanced and actually nicely tuned mid-range because it's buried under that mid-bass, also that treble peakiness. The treble itself is actually nicely sparkling as has a little bit of air there, so you do get a little bit of micro details if you are hearing for a lot of percussion that needs a lot of treble energy there. But again, the problem is when the bass hits, it's just almost covering all of that micro details from the treble section, so you don't really actually hear that kind of treble greatness there. And also the treble has, simply said, it has an unnatural feeling to it, maybe because it's using the 2 piezoelectric driver. I don't know how they tune it, but the sound of violin, the sound of cymbals and percussion sounds more splashier and not as natural as usual. And it's simply said, it doesn't feel high quality, it doesn't feel natural, even though it has a nice sparkle and extension on it, quite good extension, but it's just not natural. So simply said about the tuning, the thing that I actually only like is the mid-range, but the problem is that mid-range is buried under the mid-bass bloominess and also that treble peakiness, so I couldn't enjoy it. It's a strange tuning, and I have to say that it's a very niche tuning maybe, or simply bad tuning, because in any kind of my genre, any kind of my playlist, I simply couldn't enjoy this IM. I couldn't play rock, I couldn't play pop, I couldn't play vocals on it. I don't know what this IM supposed to excel at. And I have to say, for around $50, the technical and detail retrieval of this IM is simply bad. It's not really resolving, it doesn't have a good resolution, note definition is kind of blunted. not the treble. The treble is strangely has this quite good attack and resolution on it, but the problem is the mid-range and bass area. It's just so thick and full-bodied that it feels separated from the treble. As an overall, I don't think that this IM has a good technicalities all in all. So I simply say that this IM doesn't really have a good tonal nor technical. The problem is when I compare them with some of the IM around its price point, with the great ones of course like the Geekworld Cadenza, simply said that this IM couldn't really compete. Well, let's take a look here. The Geekworld Cadenza has simply much more balanced tuning. The bass is actually deeper, while the mid bass is not as big as the Geekworld GK10, and the mid range is nicely more forward with having better note definition and details, and the treble is somehow, even though it's not as pushed, as elevated as the Geekworld GK10, it sounds simply much more natural. And comparing them with the GK10 HBB Can, for only around $40, the GK10 HBB Can also has a bassy presentation just like this Geekworld GK10, but the problem is the GK10 HBB Can simply has much better separation and tuning. So the mid bass is more textured, it's also deeper, and it's more separated from the mid range. The mid range is nicely more forward, and the treble is still also in a nicely tuned. It doesn't go overly elevated or overly dark. But the Geekworld GK10 is simply much more darker, bloomier, and more foggy in tuning. So simply said, if you want something that is basic, get GK10 HBB Can instead. This IM is just too bloomy and too slow. So simply said, well, this is my final score for its tonal and also its technical, and this is my final rank. So what I'd like to say for the conclusion of this IM, well, it has unique facelift on it, but in terms of sound, it's not competitive enough. It's just simply one of the worst tuned maybe for nowadays IM.